The world turned to splinters and screaming. Carenza felt the carriage leave the road before she understood what was happening. One moment, the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth. The next, a deafening crack. Wood shattering, horses shrieking in terror, the sickening lurch of everything tilting sideways. She was thrown against the carriage wall, then the ceiling, then something struck her head and the world went white. When her vision returned, she was lying on frozen ground, pine needles pressed into her cheek. Her left shoulder burned with pain she couldn't name, and blood, warm, sticky, trickled from somewhere above her eye. Move. You have to move. Carenza forced herself onto her hands and knees, gasping as her ribs protested. The carriage lay 20 feet away, overturned completely, one wheel still spinning lazily in the gray afternoon light. One of the horses had broken free and fled. The other lay motionless in its harness, and beside the wreckage, crumpled like a discarded coat, was her husband. Theron Blackwood, Duke of Dunmere, lay face down in the dirt. Blood matted his dark hair. He wasn't moving. No. The word escaped her before she could stop it. No. No, no. She crawled toward him, ignoring the glass embedded in her palms, ignoring the way her vision swam with every movement. 6 months of marriage, 6 months of cold silences and careful distance, 6 months of him looking through her like she was furniture. She'd told herself she didn't care. She'd told herself this marriage was a transaction. Her family's debts erased in exchange for her hand, nothing more. She'd lied. Carenza reached him, her fingers trembling as she touched his shoulder. Theron. Theron, please. She rolled him onto his back. His face was pale beneath the blood, his eyes closed and his chest rising, falling. He's breathing. Relief crashed through her so violently she nearly collapsed beside him. You absolute fool, she whispered, pressing her hand to his cheek. I told you to take the main road. But you never listen. You never... Her voice broke. She remembered their wedding day. His expression as he'd placed the ring on her finger. Not cruel, but absent. Like he was completing a task on a ledger. She remembered their wedding night. He'd shown her to her chambers, separate from his, and said only, I hope you'll be comfortable here. Then he'd left. You cannot die, she said softly, her thumb brushing the blood from his temple. Do you hear me? You stubborn, impossible man. You cannot die before I... A branch snapped in the forest. Carenza's head jerked up. Through the trees she saw movement, shapes. 4 men emerging from the shadows, moving with purpose toward the wreckage. For one heartbeat, she thought. Rescue. Someone heard the crash. Then she saw the weapons. Long knives glinted in the dying light. One man carried a crossbow. They weren't running toward the crash with concern. They were stalking toward it with intent. And suddenly, with terrible clarity, Carenza understood. The wheel hadn't broken by accident. The axle had been sabotaged. This wasn't a crash. It was an assassination. She looked down at Theron, unconscious, defenseless, unaware that men were coming to finish what the wreckage hadn't. She could run. The forest was dense. She was small, fast when she needed to be. They wanted him, not her. She could disappear into the trees and no one would blame her. She was just the purchased bride, the settlement of a debt. She owed him nothing. Run, the voice in her head screamed. Run and live. Carenza stood. She didn't run. Instead, she positioned herself between her husband's body and the approaching men, her hands closing around a jagged piece of wood from the ruined carriage. 4 armed men, 1 injured woman with a broken plank. The odds were impossible. She didn't care. You want him, she breathed, her voice steadier than she felt. You go through me. The first man to reach her was tall, scarred across the jaw, and clearly surprised to find her standing rather than screaming. "Well now," he said, his accent rough, low-born. "Didn't expect the lady to have teeth." "Didn't expect hired killers to announce themselves with so much noise," Carenza replied. "Who sent you?" The man exchanged glances with his companions. "That's not your concern, Your Grace. Step aside. We've no quarrel with you." "You tried to kill my husband. That makes it my quarrel." "He's not your husband." The scarred man smiled, revealing missing teeth. "He's just the man who bought you. Why die for someone who doesn't care whether you live?" The words struck deeper than any blade, because they were true. Or at least, she'd believed them to be true until she'd watched him lying motionless and felt her heart trying to tear itself apart. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "About which part?" "About everything." But she didn't say that. Instead, she adjusted her grip on the wooden shard, watching the men's positions. The crossbow was the immediate threat. "Enough talk." A second man stepped forward, knife drawn. "Kill her too. Make it look like the crash took them both." Carenza moved. The wooden shard caught the second man across the face as he lunged. He screamed, stumbling backward, blood streaming from his eye. She was already spinning toward the crossbow, knowing she'd never reach him in time, knowing this was the moment she died. A hand closed around her ankle. Theron. His eyes were still closed, his face still slack. But his grip was iron, and his lips moved, barely a whisper. Down. She dropped. The crossbow bolt sang over her head, close enough to tug her hair. Before anyone could react, Theron's other hand emerged from beneath his coat holding a pistol she hadn't known he carried. The shot was deafening. The crossbowman crumpled. And suddenly Theron was moving, not unconscious at all, not even injured badly, rolling to his feet with a speed that made no sense for a man who'd seemed half dead moments ago. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice cold as winter iron. But Carenza had already grabbed the fallen man's knife. "I can fight." He shot her a look she couldn't read. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper, but there was no time to discuss it. The remaining two men were rushing them together, rage replacing caution. What followed was brutal and brief. Theron fought like someone who'd trained for violence his entire life. Efficient, merciless, and precise. Carenza fought like someone who'd learned in alleys and desperation, graceless but effective. When it was over, two men lay dead, one dying. The fourth, the scarred leader, had fled into the forest, swallowed by shadows before either could pursue. Silence fell. Carenza stood trembling, the knife slick in her grip, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was covered in blood. Hers, theirs. She couldn't tell anymore. Slowly, she turned to face her husband. Theron was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not the cold indifference of their daily interactions. Not the distant politeness of formal occasions. This was something else entirely. "You stayed," he said. "Yes." "You could have run." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" She had no answer that wouldn't expose everything she'd spent 6 months hiding, so she said nothing. But his eyes told her he already knew. He'd been awake. He'd heard every word she said when she thought him dying. And nothing between them would ever be the same. They didn't speak during the long walk to the nearest village. Carenza focused on putting one foot in front of the other, her shoulder screaming with every step, her mind racing faster than her feet. He heard. He was awake. He heard everything. She'd called him stubborn, impossible. She'd said he couldn't die before. Before what? She hadn't finished the sentence, but the implication had been clear enough. Beside her, Theron moved with a slight limp she hadn't noticed before. His wound was real then, just not as debilitating as she'd feared. He kept scanning the tree line, one hand resting on the reloaded pistol. "You're hurt," he said finally. So are you. You should lean on me. I can walk. That wasn't a suggestion. She wanted to argue. She wanted to retreat behind the cold formality that had defined their marriage from the beginning. But her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled without warning, and suddenly, his arm was around her waist, holding her upright. Stubborn, he muttered. Impossible. She heard her own words returned and felt heat flood her cheeks. I thought you were unconscious. Clearly. How long were you? Long enough. The words hung between them like a drawn blade. By the time they reached the village, full dark had fallen. Theron commandeered rooms at the small inn with the kind of quiet authority that made people obey without question. A physician was summoned. Her shoulder was declared badly bruised but not broken. His head wound was cleaned and bandaged. Through it all they performed the dance of strangers. Polite, distant, careful. But something had shifted. That night, in her small room above the tavern, a knock at her door made her jolt upright. Enter. Theron stepped inside. He'd changed into borrowed clothes. A simple linen shirt, dark trousers, nothing like the immaculate nobleman she'd married. The bandage around his head made him look younger somehow, more human. We need to talk, he said, closing the door behind him. About what? About the men who tried to kill us. He crossed to the window, peering out at the darkened street below. That wasn't random. The axle was sabotaged. They were waiting on that specific road, at that specific time. Someone knew our route. Carenza felt ice settle in her stomach. You think we were betrayed. I know we were. The question is by whom? He turned to face her. Only 3 people knew we'd be taking the forest road today. My driver, who died in the crash, my steward Huxley, and my cousin. Your cousin? Vaughn? He's next in line for the dukedom, has been since my father died without producing a second heir. Theron's jaw tightened. If I die without an heir, Vaughn inherits everything. You have proof? Not yet. But I'll find it. His eyes met hers in the dim candlelight. Carenza, the man who escaped. He saw your face. He knows you defended me. If Vaughn is behind this, you're no longer just an inconvenient wife. You're a witness. The implication was clear. You're in danger now. Because of what you did. Because she'd stayed instead of running. Because she'd chosen him. Then we find the proof together, she said quietly. Something flickered across his face. You would help me? After everything? After the way I've treated you these past months? You gave me a home when my family sold me for debts. You never raised a hand to me. Never raised your voice. She met his gaze. You may not have loved me, but you never hurt me. In my experience, that counts for something. Theron was silent for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and did something he'd never done in 6 months of marriage. He took her hand. I owe you my life, he said. Whatever comes next, I won't forget that. His fingers were warm against her cold skin. His touch was gentle, almost uncertain, like he was learning something for the first time. Then he released her and stepped back. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we ride for Dunmere, and we trust no one until we know how deep this goes. He was at the door when she spoke. Theron. He paused. When you were pretending to be unconscious, did you hear all of it? A long silence. Yes, he said quietly. I heard all of it. Then he was gone. The ride to Dunmere took 2 days. They traveled in tense silence for the first few hours. Carenza watched the countryside roll past, her mind churning through everything she knew about her husband's cousin, Vaughn Blackwood. She'd met him twice. Once at her wedding, where he'd kissed her hand and called her a lovely addition to the family, and once at a winter gathering, where he'd spent the evening watching Theron with eyes that smiled while calculating something colder. She'd thought him charming then, harmless. She'd been wrong about many things. "Tell me about him," she said finally. "Vaughn. What kind of man tries to murder his own cousin?" "A desperate one." Theron's gaze remained fixed on the window. "Vaughn's fortune is gone. Gambling, poor investments, and expensive tastes he couldn't afford. He's been borrowing against his inheritance for years. His inheritance being everything. The estate, the lands, the title. If I die without an heir, it all goes to him." The implication settled over her like a shroud. They'd been married 6 months. No heir had been conceived, because Theron had never come to her bed, never touched her beyond the brief clasp of hands at their wedding. "You knew," she said slowly. "That's why you kept me at arm's length. You were protecting me." Surprise flickered in his eyes, that she'd understood. "If we had no connection, you had no value as a target. You could live your life in comfortable irrelevance, safe from whatever games my enemies played." Comfortable irrelevance. She tasted the words. "Is that what you thought I wanted? I thought it was what you deserved. A peaceful life, untouched by the ugliness of my world. And now? Now you've made yourself a target anyway." His voice roughened. "You stood over my body with a broken plank and dared 4 armed men to kill you. There's no going back to irrelevance after that. Then stop trying to protect me by pushing me away. If I'm already in danger, I might as well be useful." "Useful how?" "Vaughn doesn't know I'm a threat. He thinks I'm just the debt bride, remember? Let me be your eyes and ears where you can't go. Let me find the proof you need." Theron studied her for a long moment. She saw him weighing options, calculating risks. Then something shifted. "You understand what you're asking. If Vaughn discovers you're investigating him, he won't hesitate. He's already tried to kill you once. I'm offering to be your partner. A real one. Not a transaction. Someone who fights beside you instead of being kept in the dark." Finally, Theron extended his hand. Not gratitude this time. Something closer to an oath. "Partners," he said. "But we do this my way. You don't move against Vaughn without telling me. And if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed?" Carenza took his hand. His grip was firm, warm. "Agreed. But I have conditions too. No more secrets. I can't help you if I don't know what I'm fighting. When we reach Dunmere, I'll show you everything I have on Vaughn. Every suspicion, every thread. Then we have an agreement." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. A small gesture, barely perceptible, but it sent heat racing up her arm. Neither of them let go. Dunmere rose from the moors like something carved from storm clouds. Gray stone walls climbed 3 stories high, flanked by towers that had watched over this land for 400 years. The windows were narrow, defensive, built for arrows, not light. Carenza had lived here for 6 months. She'd walked these halls, eaten in these rooms, slept beneath this roof. She'd never truly seen it until now. "It looks like a fortress," she murmured. "It was one once. My ancestors built it to withstand siege. They were not trusting men." Inside, Mrs. Alcott, the head housekeeper, greeted them with barely concealed alarm. "We weren't expecting you for another 3 days. There was word of an accident. The carriage was sabotaged. The driver is dead." Theron's gaze swept the entrance hall. "Where is Huxley?" "In the study, Your Grace." "Send him to me in 1 hour." Theron led Carenza through corridors she'd walked 100 times, up a passage she'd never explored, to a hidden room behind a heavy oak door. It was windowless, lit by oil lamps mounted on stone walls. Shelves lined every surface, filled with ledgers and correspondence. A large desk dominated the center, covered in papers. "My father built this room," Theron said. "He trusted no one with certain matters. Neither do I." Carenza moved toward the desk. The papers were covered in Theron's precise handwriting. Names, dates, amounts, threads of investigation, years in the making. You've been watching Vaughn for a long time. Since my father died. The physician said it was his heart. But my father was healthy. Strong. He paused. 3 months before he died, I was negotiating an engagement to Lady Mariel Ashford. Carenza went still. Mariel Ashford. My cousin. Yes. The arrangement was private. Then my father died, and 2 weeks later, Marielle's carriage went off a bridge during a storm. Theron's voice was flat, controlled. They called it an accident. But you don't believe that. The driver had worked for her family for 20 years. He knew those roads better than anyone. His eyes met hers. I couldn't prove anything, so I buried my grief and waited for Vaughn to make a mistake, and now he has. Later, when Theron returned from questioning Huxley, his expression was grim but resolved. Huxley is innocent. Someone accessed his records without his knowledge, a servant we've since dismissed for theft. The information was sold to parties unknown. One thread resolved. But many more remained tangled in darkness, and somewhere in those threads, a dead woman was still breathing. She read for 3 hours. The documents painted a picture of Vaughn Blackwood far darker than charming smiles and expensive tastes. Gambling debts, yes, but also whispers of blackmail. Loans from men whose names appeared nowhere in legitimate ledgers. A mistress in London who received payments from an account that didn't officially exist. And then there were the deaths. Theron had compiled a list of 7 people whose passing had benefited Vaughn in some way. A business rival who drowned. A creditor who fell from his horse. An uncle who left Vaughn a small inheritance after a sudden fever. Each death had been ruled natural or accidental. Each had occurred within a year of Vaughn facing financial difficulty. Marielle's name was on the list. 7 deaths. Whoa, Carenza said when Theron returned. All convenient for Vaughn. If even half of this is true, he's not just a gambler with debts. He's a murderer. Multiple times over. I know. And you've been gathering this alone. For years. I had no one I could trust. My father was dead. Mariel was dead. Anyone could be bought. I couldn't risk confiding in anyone. But now you're trusting me. You earned it. He sat on the edge of the desk, close enough that their knees nearly touched. You didn't calculate the odds. You just chose me. One evening, a week before the ball they were planning to attend, Carenza was studying documents when Theron appeared in the doorway. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I can't. He crossed to stand beside her. Every time I close my eyes, I see the carriage. I see you standing over me with that plank. I see. He stopped. See what? The crossbow. Aimed at you. His voice roughened. In my mind, I'm not fast enough. The bolt hits you. And He couldn't finish. Carenza stood, closing the distance between them. But you were fast enough. I'm here. I'm alive. Because of luck. Because of one moment where everything went right instead of wrong. His hands rose to cup her face. If I had lost you, you didn't. She kissed him. It was soft at first. Tentative. A question more than a statement. Then his arms wrapped around her, and the question became an answer. When they finally broke apart breathless, Theron pressed his forehead to hers. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not. She smiled against his lips. But you have me anyway. 3 days before Lord Pemberton's ball, Pemberton himself arrived at Dunmere, unexpected, unannounced, and wearing the expression of a man carrying bad news. It's about your cousin, Pemberton said, settling into a chair. Vaughn has been talking. At the clubs, at dinners, everywhere. He's spreading rumors about your carriage accident. What kind of rumors? He's saying you staged it yourself, to gain sympathy, to paint him as a villain. Pemberton hesitated. He's very convincing, Theron. You know how charming he can be. And people believe him? Some do, others are uncertain. Pemberton met Theron's eyes. If you appear at my ball without addressing these rumors, it could look like you have something to hide. Carenza stepped forward. We attend as planned, and we don't defend ourselves against the rumors. Pemberton blinked. I beg your pardon? If we defend, we look guilty. If we attack, we look desperate. She met his gaze directly. Instead, we give them something else to talk about. Such as, what if we gave them a different story? A secret courtship? A love match concealed for propriety's sake? A young duchess so devoted to her husband that she stood between him and assassins rather than flee. You want to control the narrative, Pemberton said slowly. I want society to choose which story they prefer. The charming cousin crying persecution, or the Duke and Duchess who nearly died in each other's arms. Pemberton was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed. Good God, Blackwood! Where did you find this woman? I'm beginning to think she found me. Theron's hand settled on the small of her back. Will you help us? I'll seat you at the head table, announce you as guests of honor, and make sure everyone sees how devoted you are. Pemberton's nervous energy had transformed into something gleeful. Vaughn won't know what hit him. After Pemberton left, Theron turned to Carenza. That was brilliant. That was desperation dressed in good shoes. She let out a shaky breath. Do you think it will work? I think you just outmaneuvered a man who's been playing these games for 20 years. His hand rose to cup her cheek. And for the record, when we perform our great romance at the ball, I won't be performing. The night of Pemberton's ball arrived wrapped in frost and starlight. Carenza stood before the mirror in her chambers, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. The gown was new, deep burgundy silk that caught the candlelight like wine, diamonds at her throat that had belonged to Theron's mother, hair arranged in an elaborate style. She looked like a duchess. She felt like a fraud. A knock at the connecting door, the one that had remained closed for 6 months of marriage. Theron stepped through, and her breath caught. Black coat fitted like armor, white cravat emphasizing his sharp jaw. He moved like a predator dressed for a hunt. You're beautiful, he said quietly. The dress is beautiful. I'm just wearing it. No, you're the one who makes it extraordinary. The carriage ride took an hour. When they arrived, Pemberton's estate blazed with light. Hundreds of candles, dozens of carriages, music spilling from open windows into the cold night air. Ready? Theron asked. No, but that's never stopped me before. The announcement came like a thunderclap. His Grace the Duke of Dunmere and Her Grace the Duchess of Dunmere. Conversation faltered. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Carenza saw Pemberton near the entrance, beaming. She saw her own father, pale and sweating, clearly unprepared for the vision of his daughter dressed like royalty. And she saw Vaughn. He stood near the fireplace, a glass of champagne frozen halfway to his lips. His handsome face had gone slack with shock, and then, quickly, rearranged itself into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But for one unguarded moment, she'd seen the truth. He was afraid. For 2 hours, they danced, not just with each other, though those were the dances that mattered, the waltzes where Theron held her close enough to feel his heartbeat. They danced with allies and strangers, each interaction carefully calibrated to reinforce their narrative. The devoted Duke, the courageous Duchess. Carenza felt the shift in the room. Suspicious glances became admiring ones, but Vaughn still hadn't approached. Then a young man pushed through the crowd, Pemberton's son. Your Grace, there's been an incident. In the garden. A woman's been hurt. She's asking for you specifically. They followed him through the gardens to a small gazebo hidden from the house. A woman sat on the bench inside, dark hair, pale skin, a traveling cloak wrapped around a thin frame. When she saw Carenza, she rose, and her face caught the moonlight. Carenza stopped breathing. The face was familiar, hauntingly familiar. Mariel? The name escaped before she could stop it. The woman smiled, and it was wrong. Twisted, bitter. Nothing like the cousin Carenza remembered from childhood gatherings. Not quite. She stepped forward into the light. But close enough to fool a grieving man for years. Theron made a sound like he'd been stabbed. Isolde, he breathed. Marielle's younger sister. Very good, Your Grace. Isolde's smile widened. I had to disappear, you see. Vaughn needed someone who could move freely. Someone no one would suspect. Someone who hated the Blackwood family almost as much as he did. Hated. Theron stepped forward. I loved your sister. I mourned her for years. You mourned her, but you never noticed me. Never saw me watching from the shadows while you courted the perfect Marielle. Isolde's voice cracked with old rage. I was supposed to be the bride. I was supposed to have the title, the wealth. But Marielle was always first. Marielle was always chosen. So you helped Vaughn kill her. The words came from Carenza like stones. Your own sister. I helped Vaughn arrange an accident that removed an obstacle. Isolde shrugged. Don't look so horrified, cousin. She pulled a pistol from her cloak. Theron moved instantly, putting himself between Carenza and the weapon. If you shoot me, every person at that ball will hear it. You'll never escape. Probably not, but Vaughn promised me satisfaction. Vaughn isn't coming to save you. Carenza stepped around Theron despite his protest. He sent 4 men to kill me in the woods. 1 escaped, and we found him dead 3 days later in a ditch. Vaughn silences anyone who fails him. You're just another tool. Shut up. When this goes wrong, and it will, he'll let you hang alone. I said shut up. The pistol swung toward Carenza. Theron lunged. The shot split the night. Carenza felt the bullet pass her face, close enough to stir her hair, close enough to feel its heat. Then Theron collided with Isolde and they both went down. The pistol skittered across a stone. Carenza dove for it, her fingers closing around cold metal just as Isolde screamed, Let me go. Enough. Theron's voice was iron. He had Isolde pinned, one knee on her back. Shouts erupted from the house. Lanterns bobbed through the garden. The shot had brought witnesses running. Pemberton arrived first. His face went white. Good God. What happened? Lady Isolde Ashford attempted to murder my wife. Theron hauled Isolde to her feet. She also confessed to involvement in her sister's death and to conspiracy with my cousin Vaughn. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. And pushing through them all, his charming mask finally cracking, was Vaughn. This is absurd. His voice carried, smooth and practiced. Isolde is clearly disturbed. Whatever she said was the raving of a madwoman. A madwoman you've been funding for 2 years. Theron's gaze locked onto his cousin. We found the accounts, Vaughn, the payments, the letters, all of it. Vaughn's smile flickered. Fabrications. I have witnesses. Carenza stepped forward, the pistol still in her hand. The dying assassin talked before he bled out. We know everything. For one perfect, terrible moment, Vaughn's mask shattered completely. She saw the monster beneath. The cold calculation, the absolute lack of remorse. Then he ran. Chaos erupted. Theron released Isolde to the footman and sprinted after his cousin. Carenza followed. The chase led through hedges toward the estate wall. Theron caught Vaughn at the wall, dragging him down into the frost-hardened grass. Carenza arrived in time to see Theron slam his fist into Vaughn's jaw. I could kill you right now. His voice was barely human. For Marielle. For my father. For my wife. Vaughn spat blood and laughed. Then do it. Prove you're no better than me. Carenza knelt beside Theron, her hand finding his. Don't. He wants you to kill him, quick and clean, instead of slow and public. She tightened her grip. Let him rot knowing he lost to a debt bride. Slowly, the wildness faded from Theron's gaze. He released Vaughn's collar. Guards, take him. As they dragged Vaughn away, his eyes found Carenza. This isn't over. Yes, it is. She met his gaze without flinching. And everyone will know you lost. The next 3 days reshaped everything. Newspapers printed special editions. Pamphlets circulated through London's coffee houses. By the time Carenza and Theron returned to Dunmere, the story had grown into legend. The Duchess who fought assassins, the Duke who exposed a conspiracy, the villain who crumbled. 3 days after the ball, visitors came in waves. Lord Ashbury, with formal congratulations. Lady Greystone, revealing that her own brother had been one of Vaughn's 7 victims. And near sunset, a visitor Carenza hadn't expected. Her father. Lord Ashford looked older than she remembered. Grayer. Smaller. The arrogance seemed to have drained away. Carenza. He stopped several feet from her. I came to apologize, for the marriage, for selling you. And what's brought on this sudden remorse? The fact that I'm powerful now? He flinched. I deserve that. You deserve far worse. She approached him slowly. 4 men tried to kill me in the forest. I nearly died because you sold me to settle your debts. Lord Ashford had nothing to say. Here's what happens now. You return to Hampshire. You live quietly. You never contact me again unless I invite it, which I won't. And you spend the rest of your life knowing that your nothing daughter became more than you ever imagined. Carenza, please. Goodbye, father. She turned her back on him. After he left, Theron emerged from the shadows. Are you all right? No. Her voice cracked. But I will be. He pulled her close. She buried her face in his chest and let herself shake, releasing something she'd carried her entire life. When she finally lifted her head, she felt lighter than she had in years. What happens now? She asked. Vaughn faces trial. The evidence is overwhelming. He stroked her hair. And after that, I was hoping we might actually begin our marriage. Begin? The real one, not the transaction. His hands cupped her face. I want to deserve the woman who saved my life with a broken plank and a spine of steel. That sounds like a very good plan. He kissed her right there in the great hall. She kissed him back. 6 months later, Vaughn Blackwood was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. The trial had been the sensation of the season. Every newspaper covered it. When the verdict was announced, guilty on all counts, the crowd outside the courthouse cheered. Vaughn would spend the rest of his life in prison. Isolde, declared an accomplice, would join him. Carenza watched from the gallery as the sentences were read. Theron sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. It's over, she whispered. It's over. They returned to Dunmere that evening. The house felt different now. Not a fortress, but a home. I have something for you, Theron said that night. Finding her in the library, he produced a small leather folder. The original marriage contract. She opened it. Her father's signature, Theron's signature, the cold legal language that had defined their union. So you can watch me destroy it. He threw it into the fireplace. They watched it burn together. The terms and conditions, the debts and obligations, the transactional foundation of everything they'd built. No more contract, Theron said quietly. Just us. 1 year later, Dunmere had transformed. The hidden study now held different documents, plans for a charitable foundation, records of women and children rescued from desperate circumstances. The Mariel Foundation, named for the woman Theron had lost, had already helped dozens of families. By next year, it would help hundreds. And in the nursery on the 3rd floor, a new Blackwood was learning to walk. She has your stubbornness, Theron observed. She has your refusal to admit defeat. Carenza scooped up the child. Don't you, Marielle? Little Marielle gurgled happily, her dark hair curling around a face that held the best of both parents. That evening, Carenza stood at the window watching snow fall over Dunmere's grounds. She thought about the carriage crash, the moment when everything changed. She'd stood over his body with a broken plank and dared death to take him. Arms wrapped around her from behind. Theron's chin rested on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about? What would have happened if I'd run?" "You wouldn't have. You're not the woman who runs. You're the woman who fights." He turned her to face him. "You're the woman who changed everything by being exactly who you are." She reached up to touch his face. "And you're the man who was smart enough to pretend to be unconscious." "One of my better decisions." "What was your best?" He leaned in, his lips brushing hers. "Falling in love with you." She kissed him. Soft, slow, full of promise. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, firelight danced across walls that had witnessed 400 years of history. But tonight, only one story mattered: the story of a duchess who refused to run and a duke who finally learned to stay. The end. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If this story touched something in you, the fight for justice, the power of being chosen, the courage it takes to stand when running would be easier, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment and where you're listening from. If you're ready for another story where love conquers the impossible, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next chapter. You're the reason these stories exist. Thank you for being here, for listening, for believing that even in the darkest moments, love can find a way.